was writing cereals alone. Was there any, were the deadline pressures tougher, were the working conditions tougher than when you were doing it as part of the team?
Well, the workload doubled. No, and I was young in those days, and when I went to, my first job was for Mascot Pictures. Time meant nothing. I have worked 48 hours without ever going home and changing my clothes. Today the kids want overtime, they want that. We got nothing. I was happy. I wasn't married. I'd never worked before, so I thought that this was the way you work. And working at Nat Levin, everybody did. I got one day, one of the grips said to Nat Levin, "Mr. Levin, could I have a half a day off? My wife is going to have a baby." And Levin said, "Oh, I didn't know your wife was pregnant." He said, "She isn't, but she will if you'll be, if you'll give me a half a day."
He was already worth $1 million and a self-made man. You had to admire him. He was a hyper, go, 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 go. And the first day, about the third day that I came to work running errands for him, it was at 6001 Santa Monica Boulevard, right across from the cemetery, and the offices were above a sand and gravel building. And I came to work, and it was a Sunday morning. And I'm running the mimeograph machine, and I smell smoke. So I looked down the hall, and smoke is coming out of one of the buildings, and I knew immediately that something was on fire inside there. So I ran down. Levin was in his office, and I said, "Come on quick, the joint's burning down." I grabbed the fire extinguisher, and he followed me down the hall and said, "Break the door down." I said, "Literally?" He said, "Yeah." So I kicked the door in, and the door jam came with it and everything. And there lies a writer, God love him, we all love him, named Norman Hall. Normie was a drunk. He was a better writer than 95% of the writers that I've ever worked with. Normie was loaded, and I pulled him off the couch and put the couch out. He was sleeping there with a cigarette in the closet. And I'm holding him like this, and Levin says, "Throw him out." I said, "You mean literally?" He said, "Literally." So I grabbed Norm by the back of the neck and the seat of his pants, ran him down these long flight of steps, and by now he's come alive enough to kill me, and he's trying to swing at me, and I'm holding him off. And I opened the door and threw him out in the street. So he laid there, closed the door and locked it. Now it's a glass door. He laid there for a minute, here he comes. He comes running back like this, he stops right at the doorway, and I step back a little bit, and he says, "That's a hell of a thing to do to a friend." Now, Levin was always good to me. He was a friend, he had a sense of humor, and he was surrounded by good people. Buddy, I think you worked for him when it was Mascot, didn't you? Yes? Mm-hmm. Tommy, I know you did.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
But he was a very serious person, and apparently he was a gambler, because after he got out of the studio business, he went into gambling, and he died in the motion picture broke. And I was sorry to hear it, because he'd had his ups and downs, and he's always bounced back, but gamblers don't bounce back sometimes, too. Everything seems to go the wrong direction. But they made some good cereals. He made the Rex and Rennie cereals. He made the King of the Wild Horse cereals. And the people, the Corn Republic, were the basis of that were all picked up, and they were from Levin stable of people. Larry Wickland, Mandy Schaefer, Bert Clark, and many, many more. The writers that still work for him years later that he had picked. Barney Sorecki, names that you don't know, but you'll see on the deals. And after they formed Republic, there were 5 companies that Yates got together, and then he aced them out one by one until Yates remained the solo power of Republic. It's a story that's really never been told, and it's a story that I told Jack Mathis in great detail of one day, and when his book comes out, the story of what happened, how it became Republic Pictures, will probably be told. If I die, it'll die with me. Buddy knows the story well. Tommy knows the story well. We very seldom discuss it, but Nat Levin was a good man. And everybody that worked for him would tell you the same thing. Thank you. Tell you a story. I don't know what cereal it was, but Yates never looked at the cereals. But this one day, he was sitting there when we came in to check a composite print, which is the final print with the sound running alongside. So he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "We're going to check a composite." He said, "Do you mind if I sit in?" We said, "No, you can sit in. Why not? No, it's a studio." So we run this episode, and the ending of, now you've seen this guy get in the box, and the heavies find out he's in the box. Now, you see him carry the box down into the cellar, and they throw the box into a big incinerator, and the last you see the box burning up. Close the door, and through the door you see the box burning up. So the lights come on, and he goes, that's pretty good. How do you get him out of that? So Bunny Brown, the producer, said, come next week. So he turns to me and he said, "Billy, what happened?" I said, "He's the producer, ask him." He turns to Jack English. Jack English said, "I didn't shoot that episode, I don't remember." And he's mad now. We're all sitting there. And he chewed tobacco, he spits over and
Mrs. Platoon.
he says, okay, all right. He says, "I'll see you next week." Well, they didn't come out on weekly deals, and we forgot it. About every 4 days, or you never knew when the composites were coming through. So we got word to come down, the composite came in, we got to check it out to make sure it's what we are and send it out. Well, apparently, Yates had left an order to tell him when that came through. This is probably, might have been 10 days later. When we walk in the projection room, he's beat us to it. He's sitting in there. Now he punches the button. No words are spoken. He didn't say hello or anything. No words are spoken. And he leans forward like this. Well, the end in the takeout, as we always call them, you see him get out of the box, but that you didn't see in the other episode. Zing! The buzzer stops and the thing stops. We proceed to get a lecture on cheating the little kids of America. Creating a bunch of little monsters because we had lied to them. And I thought he was going to can us all. Yes, we felt guilty about it. For 28 years. And again, I could write a book about him. He was a little Scotchman. Self-made man. I don't think he'd been over the 4th grade. He chewed tobacco. He had been a tobacco salesman. That's how he started to make his money. He was worth something like $52 million on 7 Bradstreet this time. But he had a heck of a good sense of humor. He loved to drink. You know, he loved people. And I had some great experiences with him. One day we were sitting in the cutting room, and there was 4 or 5 big chairs in a row, and then there were seats of theater seats down below. And these were where you sat, and there were buttons there. You could stop and go or do whatever you wanted with a film, with a projectionist. So Yates comes in, and he sits in his usual chair, and there's a big brown paint bucket about that big. It was a cuspidor. And the cutter was there and everybody, but there was a kid sitting right down below the cuspidor. So he looked around, he tapped the kid on the shoulder and he said, "You're new here, aren't you?" But he treated me so good. He had a soft spot in his heart for people. When I went in the service, he put my wife under contract for the 5 years. In fact, says at a minimum salary. But I think she worked maybe 5 or 6 days in all the 5 years. And he was a nice man. He made an awful lot of mistakes. I remember once a funny deal. They had a big convention, and they had these Autry, and it might have been Roy, and some other singer, I think it was Phil Regan, stood up and sang a song that one of the top songwriters in America in those days had written. He was working at the studio. Broadway plays. We had the man that I can't think of his name, but we had a head of the music department that had later on wrote one of the big Broadway hits. But anyway, they sang this song. I'm going to sing it for you. It says, "Mr. Yates, we love you. You're the Rock of Gibraltar and a bit of okay. Mr. Yates, we need you. How can anybody falter when you're leading the way? Consolidated, always click, you're the spirit of 1776. Mr. Yates, we need you. And remember that we Yates to see you go." He canned the boat the next morning. Worked every other day because it was too much for one person. On your day off, you prepare for the next day. You were shooting probably 100, 125 setups a day, and you couldn't make any mistakes. I mean, it was boom, 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 and that is why we had the 2 director deals. Jack English and myself worked together for years, and we used to go into the cutting room and we'd argue on who shot what. We both had the same technique. We used to talk about technique of shooting, of which we have done many times with Buddy. And I had a fun experience with Jack once. He was shooting and he had a big sequence where a big water trip down into the cave set and washing the hero away. And so I'm over at the local bar across the street and having a drink about 5 and 6 in the afternoon. Here comes Jack, and he looked beat, and I said, "How'd the big trip go?" He said, "Geez, it looked great until the rocks floated down the river."
People that you say, well, I need these people to make this thing go? Or?
Oh, absolutely. We had input on the serials from the very beginning of the start of the story. The directors always had a lot of input into the story. we were allowed to change the story if we wanted to, up to a certain extent. If you wanted to, they didn't care. You could change the action around. The director could. Republic was wonderful. Some studios you've got to do everything as it's written. Republic never required that. There were a lot of changes between that all of us used to make on the sets. Let me tell you how I feel about directors. A director should be able to help a script at least 35%, or he is no director. From the script that you read, John Ford, take John Ford. There was a scene in one of his pictures where his son is suddenly in private under him, and Wayne is the boss. And they're in a tent, and he says to the kid, look, just because you're my son, I don't want any problems with you. And he just gives the kid hell. He says, now get out there, you're under my command, I don't want any more trouble with you. So Wayne watches him go, and he hasn't seen the kid since he's been a baby. And he watches him go, and he gets up, and he backs up to the tent where the kid was standing, and goes like this. He's had his eye on the spot. He wants to see how tall the kid was. Now that was not in the script, I'll guarantee you. That came out of Mr. Ford. The fingernails scratching across the deal when McLaughlin dies in The Informer. You can bet that wasn't in the script. Those were things that came out of John Ford's head. Willie Wyler's scripts were the same way. He put the little touches in, the little comedy gags and things, as did we always.
For instance, we were talking about the Red Rider. Okay, some of the villains. When you read the script, would you say, okay, these look like these are the roughnecks I need to make this thing go? Did you have these kind of inputs with the stars and the cast?
Yeah, sure. We okayed everybody that went in. Went into the deal, and you don't think we have any input into it. When they put Don Barry up for Red Rider, I screamed my head off. I said, good God, here's a guy that's 7 foot tall, and you put this goddamn midget in. And we were at one of these things that was a dinner honoring Georgie Sherman as top director. They gave him an award. And Don Barry was the MC, and he stood up and he says, well, I've got to tell you, Bill, that this is Bill Witney. He said, when I made the Red Riders, he didn't want me in that picture, and he fought and fought, and I said, you bet I did. Right up to the end. No, we had okay, all of us.
Yes, sir.
What happened to all of the prints made on the Lone Ranger? I always heard that Lee Powell went around the country advertising himself as the Lone Ranger, and Herbert Yates got hot and bothered about it, and got a lot of stuff destroyed. Is that true, fictional? Or
What happened to the old Lone Ranger prints, and did Lee Powell have access to any of them?
I don't believe those rumors. Lee Powell, we put him in another serial after that. Fighting Devil Dogs or whatever it was. And then his contract ran out, and Lee went out and made a series. I call it the Lone Ranger or anything, because there was a contract. That Lone Ranger contract was a bad contract that we got into with that. They had to destroy the negatives on that, just like Fu Manchu after a while. And Lee Powell went out, and then he went into the Marines right after that, and he was killed at Guadalcanal. Unfortunately, he was a nice, good guy that looked like a good prospect.
everything I've seen, when that's always been dubbed in Spanish, when it's not, prints are just not, they're not even decent.
Well, the natives were apparently all destroyed. Even the fine grains were probably destroyed. I don't know. See, when I came out of the service, many things had changed. The cereals were on the kaputs. I made one cereal after that, I don't even know the name. And they destroyed all that hot film, all that old acetate film. It was the same, made out of the same stuff as gunpowder's made out of.
I understand the main reason they destroyed it because the insurance, they had to have special buildings to keep it in.
Now that makes sense. That's the first thing that you said that makes sense. That really, that's probably what happened. Wherever money was concerned, you could bet that they were going to check into this.
My favorite Republic cereal is, my favorite cereal of all time is The Adventures of Captain Marvel. Could you please tell us anything about the making of it? A story of...
Captain Marvel. Well, let's see, it had Billy, it had
Tom Tyler.
Tom Tyler had a perfect, he was a Pollock like I am. And he was a very nice man. He had a perfect body. He wasn't very practical, but he looked great. And Dave Sharp was about 5'10". He was about 6'3", and Davy was proportioned just like him. And Davy Sharp doubled him all through, all the takeoffs. And I didn't think the takeoffs and everything in the feature were half as good as ours, where Davy hit the beat board and took off, and some of those were pretty wild. I got a funny story about that. We had a dummy built out of balsa wood that we'd sail from rock to rock, and we'd just go out and then we'd cut, and Davy would come bouncing in and make the landing. And there's a bunch of horses standing half asleep down below where they were rigging this. We heard the Blydecker boys would have rigged this all morning. Finally, they came to me and said, "Billy, I think we're all set to shoot this. You want to come up with the camera and we'll shoot it?" I was nearby. So I said, "Yeah." So we moved up there and they fiddled and monkeyed and everything. So I said, "Okay, let's make it." Now these horses are standing underneath. They're not in the shot at all. It's just from rock to rock. And then you see them go behind a rock. So here comes this dummy down, just going 100 miles an hour, and the cape is flying. And it makes a noise when it goes down on these wires. It goes zzz. Well, all these horses looked up, and they all watched this thing go over. And they all went back to eating, and 2 minutes later, one of them came rearing up, went and took off down the road. It was the greatest double take I've ever seen. Somebody said, how'd you get into do certain things in that? And I said, "Well, we ran the dummy down and cranked backwards." They said, "What about the cape?" And I said, "We tied it down."
Shazam!
Yeah, but it's been answered already. I simply wanted to ask Frank Coughlin what his impression was after the interview for Captain Marvel. Then I wanted Bill Whitney's impression of that same interview. I find it very interesting, I think, to learn what Frank thought his chances were going to be of playing the part and what Bill really thought about hiring him.
Well, I was working in Meta Boy Scout at MGM in December of 1940, and my agent called the set and said, "Can you get away for about 3 hours to go on an interview out to Republic Studio? It's for a serial called Adventures of Captain Marvel, and you would play a young radio reporter named Billy Babson. I must confess, I was not a comic book fan at the moment. I'd never heard of Captain Marvel or Billy Batson, but I did get off, and I drove all the way over from Culver City to the Valley. I was ushered into the office of Bunny Brown. Bunny Brown, the producer. Sitting there were two young fellows named William Witney and John English, who I had never really known before, but their names were familiar to me. And they kind of looked at me and nodded their head. They didn't boo or anything like that. So I went home. I dropped by a drugstore and bought Captain Marvel so I could see what it was all about. And 3 days later, my agent called back and said, "Hey, you got the job. You're going to be Billy Batson." And this nice man, Bill Klein here, in his book, In the Nick of Time, says that the casting of Frank Coughlin and Billy Batson was about as fine a piece of casting for resembling the person you were to impersonate that's ever been done. But now we'll hear what really happens. The minute he walked in, he looked about 14 years old, is what we wanted. If you were under 18, we had to have a welfare worker with you at all times, and a school teacher had to come in and teach. We couldn't afford this, it was very expensive. So looking 14 years old and I said after he left, what kind of experience did he have? And the casting guy, delightful guy, laughed like hell. He said he's been acting since he's 3 years old. And Jack said, "So how long ago was that?" He said, "Well, I'll guarantee you he's over 18 years old." So then we said, "Okay, looks like a nice guy, let's hire him." So that's how we started. When my grandkids come to the house, they don't want to watch cartoons. They want to see the serials that I have on tape. So I've read Captain Marvel for them many times. And this happened, and I thought it was so cute that I wrote an epilogue to my book as a result. My 5-year-old grandson was watching Captain Marvel. He'd seen 2 episodes of me saying Shazam, going up in smoke and then flying away. So he whispered to his mother, "Can Grandpa really fly?" And she said, "Yes, dear, but he can't fly as fast as he used to."
This country in a possible sequel to Fu Manchu, either be done or both of you.
Fu Manchu was my favorite cereal. I thought it had a lot of class to it. I've got some fond memories of it. Henry Brandon was Fu Manchu as far as I was concerned. And why they didn't pick him up when they started to make these television shows on it in public, I will never understand. Because I'm sure Henry was still around, because he was in New York with Beth and myself. She fell in love with him. Hell of a nice guy. But we had tested every actor in Hollywood. I think young, mostly the older Fu Manchus, and then was this young kid. And we said, all of us dismissed him immediately because to be nice, she said, "Well, go ahead and read for us." The minute he opened his mouth, he was Fu Manchu. I don't remember, they talked about him. It's the only time that we killed him off in the original story. And then they screamed and hollered at us that you can't kill Fu Manchu off. So we didn't kill him off. That's the only serial I think we ever made that we didn't suggest that the heavy was knocked in the head. I don't ever remember any talk about making another one. The cereal cost a lot of money at the time. The budgets that you see on these cereals, I would say offhand, don't you believe them? Because the studios have a way of above the line and over the line. They are above the line are things that are fixed, like salaries and everything that they can fiddle with. Below the line, you can't monkey with it. That's the crew and everything else. But when you see above the line on a budget cereal, oh, they can tack onto those things like you can't believe. We always paid overhead, terrific overhead at the studio just to make them, and that was on your budget. That didn't go into the screen up there. To me, the budget is what you see up there. That's what Jack English and I tried to put on the screen. The money that was spent wasn't spent back here. It was spent up where the people see it. And Jack was a hell of a nice man. We and I were very close friends. I have one child, a little boy, and he was the little boy's godfather, so you know what I thought of him. But we used to, like Tony Brown said once, he was sitting between us and he moved over onto the other end and he said, oh boy, I'm not going to get in between you two guys. And they left us alone. Republic, they left the cereals. The cereals were making the money for the studios. They keeping the cereals. We were spending a lot of money on the cereals when they were spending $30,000 on their big features. And we were spending the money. The Lone Ranger made more money per dollar spent. Now that's per dollar spent than Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which came out the same year as the Lone Ranger cereal. But it had a lot of class to it in those days. I see it now and it's pretty crummy, but in those days, you've got to remember, we were talking about sound and stuff and where the theaters were playing, which reminds me of a story about one night we were trying to go home and the sound man said, we got to do it again. I heard a cough in the background. And the cameraman looked up at him and says, for God's sake, where these things play, the car will be coming out of the car barn any size, so print it.